So I have to admit, when I found out the news the other day that the Bears decided to bench Jay Cutler, that it put me in one of the best moods that I've been in a long time. I celebrated, I whooped, I hollered, and everything else. I'm like, finally it has happened. Finally the realization has come. Finally, people in the organization, the fan base, are understanding what a major problem for this team has been for years. They understand that this guy is not the guy. And no matter how much they try to pretend him to be, no matter how much they want him to be, no matter how much they want to hope him to be, he's not the answer. He's not it. We have seen enough. It is time to effing move on. So in that sense, I was giggly tits. I'm like, yes, yes, yes. They finally benched that sorry son of a bitch. The Schleg Daddy can be happy once again. But as I think about it more and more, I just realized that the Chicago Bears benching Jay Cutler really, frankly, is nothing to celebrate. It really isn't. It is a larger indication of a significant failure of this organization for many years. It's a realization for me as a Bears fan that this organization has basically wasted the past 6 years with this guy. And for all of that time, pretty much believed in their heart of hearts, even though evidence clearly indicated otherwise, that he was going to be that guy, that he was going to be that answer. Now I sit there and I look, and I've seen a half decade of my life as a Bears fan basically be wasted in a futile attempt to chase something that wasn't going to happen. It is yet another half decade of being a Bears fan where this team doesn't have a franchise quarterback. They don't have that guy, and they don't know where that guy is going to come from or if they're going to be able to find it, and if so, how long it's going to take before they do finally find that guy. It's the realization of several seasons being lost. It's the realization of knowing just how much time was wasted. It's the realization of, while there's been so much frustration from my end for many years about this, that there really isn't that much vindication to be now that people have finally come to their senses. It's a realization of just how bad this organization truly is, and just how lost this organization truly is, and just how badly this organization needs to be completely and totally blown up and rebuilt from the bottom up and the top down. I mean, here is a guy that less than a year ago was given Aaron Rodgers type money, and he yet again failed twice to be able to beat Aaron Rodgers. This guy was the highest paid offensive player in the league in this season, 2014. And what did he do in return? He had led the Bears to a 5-9 record and led the league again in turnovers. I mean, there's just, other than the fact that it indicates that Cutler's time in Chicago is coming to an end, there isn't a lot to celebrate here. I think back to when they traded for him and the ridiculous price they gave up for him. They gave up 2 first-round picks, a third-round pick, and an NFL mediocre starting quarterback at Kyle Orton to get one guy. That wasn't a whole lot better than Orton to begin with. They paid an incredible price. And I watched year after year as excuse after excuse was made, after a coordinator was run out of town, after coordinator was run out of town, after a head coach was run out of town, after all this money was spent on the offensive side of the ball, and the production still wasn't there. It was excuse after excuse after excuse. It was the failure to acknowledge a sunken cost. It was the failure to acknowledge that it was time to move on. It was a failure by a new regime to understand the mistake of the previous regime, and instead of moving on from that mistake of the previous regime and maybe having a chance to succeed, they tied themselves to that previously failed regime and have now failed themselves. It is the realization that there is no real credible option on the Bears roster to replace Cutler at this point in time. It is the realization that this offense that was supposed to be so star-spangled awesome, that I didn't fully believe, that was supposed to be so loaded with talent that nobody could fail, has failed. This so-called elite offense couldn't score 30 points in any game so far this season. That this team that has been so bad on defense is still absolutely terrible on defense, and no better or no more improved than they were last year when they were so bad on the defensive end of the ball. It's the realization that things are going to get a whole lot worse in Chicago before they get better. It's the realization that there has to be a major total rebuild begun at Soldier Field, at Hallis Hall. There's no question. You can't try to put a Band-Aid over a bullet hole anymore. You can't sit there and try to keep plugging these holes in free agency. You have to build your team through the draft. And in order to do that, that takes time. It's also the realization of knowing while getting rid of Cutler is great and it's important for the organization and the ability to move on, which is what they need to do, which has to happen. It's knowing that they're in a position in the draft because of the number of games that they won that they probably aren't in a position to get a marquee quarterback that could build around. There's no real tangible evidence that the Bears are going to be able to find that young quarterback right away. And if they just go right back into the free agent or trade market and get another veteran, they're not learning from the mistakes of the past, and ultimately they'll be doomed to basically repeat the same result. It's knowing that this organization has now missed the playoffs for 4 straight years, is trending downward, and it could potentially be another 4 to 5 years before this team could even think about making the playoffs again. It's knowing that it's yet another year where this team isn't a contender. They're not a championship team. And I've seen so much of it during my 30 years of being a Bears fan. It gets old. It gets very tiring. It's frustrating. So while I could sit there on the one hand and be all giggly tits and excited about Cutler getting benched and feel some type of sick vindication to say, finally, I've been proven to be right and all you asshats that disagreed with me can eat shit, at the end of the day, it's just not that much of a reason to celebrate because it's an indication of the organization's failures with him. It's an indication of his failures. It's an indication of time wasted. It's an indication of how far this organization has dropped and is still going to continue to drop. It's an indication of just how bad off this organization truly is. It's an indication of so many things. It's an indication that things are going to get a whole lot worse before they get better. It's an indication that it could be several more years before the Bears even entertain the thought of being a playoff team again. It's just not a lot of reason to celebrate. I always thought it was going to be too. I always thought the day that Jay Cutler got benched or was kicked out of town would be a day I'd pop open a 40 and I'd sit there and just nothing could ruin my day. Somebody could die and I'd still be happy. But now as I look at it, yeah, I'd be happy, but it's no reason to celebrate. Because it still doesn't change the fact that these Chicago Bears suck. And this Chicago Bears organization is still stuck on stupid. Because even as I look at this, they make the decision to bench Jay Cutler. They're still locked up to him in a big way financially with no guarantee that anybody wants to trade for him. They've still set their organization back financially for a couple of seasons because of this. And even then, instead of starting the rookie that they thought was valuable enough to protect on the 53-man roster and David Fales, they're starting Jimmy Clausen. So even when they make a good move by benching Cutler, which had to happen, they go in the wrong direction. It's like the Bears just can't help but be stuck on stupid. And that's why, as glorious it could be on the one end, to see that Cutler's finally going to be riding out of fucking town, and I can't wait for that. And I admit, I can't wait for that. And I will be happy to see that day. It's not much of a cause to celebrate because, again, things are going to get a whole lot worse for the Chicago Bears organization before it gets any better. And I've seen enough bad Bears football in my lifetime. I didn't want to have to see several years more of this, especially because the massive rebuild that's going to be underway at Hallis Hall should have been begun a couple of years ago. And instead, it's just now going to be beginning. And I'm not even 100% sold that this organization will be bright enough to see that it does need to begin. And that's a scary thought. It's going to be a lot more bad, mediocre football in Chicago before it gets better.